My guest today on the Neil Wilkins podcast is Director of Global Sustainable Transformation Practice at Kantar, Emily Hill. Emily is a sustainability strategist with a decade of consulting experience across brand, insight, and innovation challenges. Emily helps brands use their influence for good by uncovering the issues that matter and then advising them on where to play and how to show up in order to drive sustainable business growth at the same time as positive social change. No mean feat. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Hi, Neil, and hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. So as Neil mentioned, I work in the Global Sustainable Transformation Practice at Kantar. We work at the intersection between people, brands, and sustainability. For the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of leading our partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So I'm sure I'll share a bit more about that in due course, but also very much involved with the work that we do with the World Federation of Advertisers, as well as working with a number of different corporate clients.
It's a sensitive topic as well, isn't it? I mean, as we're talking here, COP30 is happening. There's a great big kind of, I guess, sort of global debate on the whole kind of sustainability and climate and all of these kind of real hot topics that have over the last decade, I guess, and certainly you'll have seen this, sort of almost go in cycles, haven't they? At some points they're really the flavour of the day. Everybody wants to jump on board. Everybody wants to try and figure it out. And then they seem to kind of almost sort of take a little bit more of a back seat as everybody then gets commercially wound up in just, I guess, surviving economically. You're playing quite a complex and, I guess, sensitive and challenging field, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the geopolitical events of this year in particular have been quite turbulent, I think, for the sustainability community in general. What I would say is quite hopeful and promising is that when we still look at the data in terms of like what people care about, we run this huge global study every year, and people still care about sustainability. People still want to live more sustainable lifestyles. And that sort of emphasis and I suppose pull towards a new way of living and thinking is still very much there, and we see that reflected all around the world. So despite the, I suppose, headwinds that we are facing, and it can feel tricky at times to navigate, I think there's still a lot of energy from everyday citizens that we still need to think differently about how we consume and how we live. That's what keeps me going anyway.
And I guess it kind of must feel like that as well. This kind of, I need to keep going. I need to be stoic. I need to kind of constantly have that hope, because it must be a bit demoralizing sometimes when you're talking to groups or you've got a particular client where there feels like there's resistance. I mean, you and I know it's the answer, because if we don't do this stuff, we're going to be in deep whatever, and yet there is still resistance. There's kind of almost this sense possibly of, well, we can kind of factor that into our plans for next year, or, well, actually, if only we can see a competitive advantage or something commercially relevant in it, will we start to focus on it? Do you still see it? I mean, say 10 years later, do you still see it as a little bit, for lots of organizations and sectors, a bit of a peripheral activity, or are you now starting to see that it's kind of embedded more in the broader strategies?
I would say in general, particularly over the last sort of 4 years, we've seen sustainability much better integrated into corporate strategy, particularly because of the push from a legislative perspective, I suppose, in the world of ESG. People need to report what it is they're doing. And I would say that still in light of the backdrop that we're up against, there are lots of different examples of brands that have really well integrated sustainability into the way that they do business, and it is no longer seen as something that's peripheral. It's not to say that that's the case in all instances, but I would say that there's been a huge amount of work, especially with a lot of the clients that I've worked with, in terms of really bringing sustainability into brand strategy in a really meaningful way that makes sense and actually drives change.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, really, the fact that we've needed legislation, and certainly in some industries regulation comes in, which is obviously sector specific, to actually kind of
Mm.
do this. It's almost like there was a carrot and a stick. The carrot kind of, we couldn't really figure it out, but now the big stick's there and we're all getting beaten by this big stick. Now we're looking for the carrot again and sort of saying, look, we've got to do this, but how can we do this better? How can we do this, from a commercial sort of, competitive angle? We don't want to just hit and mitigate the standards and just kind of deal with stuff. We actually want to try and push this forward. I'm kind of getting a sense here that there is a bit of a positive kind of momentum building where people are thinking, actually, if we've got to do this and we really devote some resources and energy and maybe some planning time into this, we could do it right. We could actually do it better. In fact, actually, we could lead our industry in this. Am I kind of reading that right?
Yeah. I've talked more about, I suppose, the risk mitigation side of things, and what we've seen in some of the studies we've been doing is sort of this transition from people thinking about sustainability as a moral issue only, but now what we're seeing is it is in fact material to business success in the future, and that has thus triggered a sort of change in mindset in terms of the way that businesses look at it. But it's not just a risk mitigation exercise. Like, you're totally right. Businesses are seeing the upsides, and there are a number of benefits to engaging in sustainability or circular economy, whether that is, as you say, like a competitive advantage versus your peers, whether you're improving the customer experience, whether you're creating brand value, essentially. We know that there's strong correlation between brand perceptions when it comes to sustainability and what that actually means to overall perceptions of a brand and what it stands for, and your propensity to purchase, that type of thing. So I would say that there are loads of case studies out there of businesses who are embracing this, whether it's the Patagonias, the IKEAs of the world, but can really see the upsides and are really going after that. And I think that's the narrative that we need to really see change happen.
It's so good, isn't it, that that Mark Carney quote from many, many years ago. I've paraphrased this over the years, but the whole thing about it's only businesses that kind of embrace this stuff that are going to be the businesses of the future. And it's almost like it feels like it's coming true now. I mean, it just felt so motivational, inspirational at the time, but it was like, yeah, I know it'd be nice, wouldn't it? But it's not really going to happen, is it? And yet what you're saying is now we're seeing all these case studies coming through where it is actually now becoming a reality. It's taken a while, but we're getting there. So there really is a genuine kind of evidenced hope here that is actually playing out, which is great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I give a couple of examples. I suppose there's lots of movement in the fashion retail space in terms of brands embracing sort of new business models. That's been a real driver of growth. I was reading this Bain study the other day, and it was projected that between 2021 and 2030 that there would be an additional sort of 30% of growth that would come from circular business models. And I think there are certain sectors that really are embracing that, and that's being reflected within their revenue figures. And then other smaller examples of brands like Ocado, the UK retailer, embracing refill models, and them seeing the dividends in terms of more people being more likely to purchase things that are used in refill solutions, but also just seeing higher sales in general. So delivering against the linear metrics that we're also used to.
I want to go deeper, much deeper into this whole circularity thing, because it is a word that has fascinated me for years and years and years, and I've always kind of struggled, I guess, trying to tell the right story. So I guess I've got this concept in my head that doing business, being in marketing, trying to drive consumption, which was the old business model, which was, if you can sell some more stuff, more boxes, more products, more services or whatever, you're a good marketer, you're an effective marketer, because you're kind of driving this, push towards consuming stuff. And that feels so, in the conversation we're having now, so ugly. It feels so inappropriate that we should be driving consumption, because obviously consumption requires Earth's resources. It requires, a huge amount of kind of processing of the stuff that we have so little of. So let's, for people who don't necessarily understand this word circularity, can you kind of give a sense at a very kind of base level? Because I just want to check in that I'm getting it right too, just in terms of the way of thinking about this. So circularity is not about consumption per se, but it's much more about kind of reinventing, repurposing, recycling, reusing, reworking the stuff that we've already got, or the things that we're going to be producing.
Yeah, exactly. So to borrow the Ellen MacArthur definition of circularity or circular economy, is essentially considering a new system in which materials never become waste, and in which like nature can be regenerated. So thinking about those two things specifically, and what that means in essence is that products and materials are always kept in circulation, whether that's through maintenance, reuse, repair, remanufacturing, recycling, composting, but the end outcome being that having a positive impact on issues like climate change, and not wasting resources that are actually finite, like they will come to an end. And I think for me, when that dawned on me, I was like, this is actually a solution to a real problem that does exist and doesn't always get as much airtime as other topics like climate change in particular might do. So yeah, I'd say that's a high level snapshot of circularity.
And it feels like it's been hiding in plain sight, because it is so, when you say it like that, and that's really eloquently put, and I think I totally understand what you're saying now. It kind of is just so obvious, it's like, well, surely that's what we should all be doing. Surely that's what we all must have been doing. And yet the answer, actually, if you look in the mirror as a marketer, and I'm going to challenge everybody listening to this, whether you're a business owner, entrepreneur, startup, micro business, through to, big corporate marketers here, I'm going to challenge you actually to really be honest here and say, do you really do that? Even if you think there's a bit of stuff you're doing to encourage it, are you really doing that? Because there's so much that makes up that circularity thing, doesn't there? Because if you're saying what we're not going to do here is that anything needs to go to waste, and however we define waste, that is a big, big hill to climb, isn't it, for most organizations who maybe are starting right at ground zero. They're at base camp, as it were, in the whole kind of, climbing the mountain metaphor there. So there's a lot to do. I mean, are there kind of processes and models that can kind of enable this and make this, almost like a step-by-step framework or plan?
Yeah. So I think, just sorry to respond to one of your comments that you just mentioned in terms of thinking about the role of marketing. And I'm personally really excited about the opportunity for marketing in terms of accelerating the adoption of circular economy. And I think a lot of emphasis on the past in terms of the way that we think about marketing is all about reaching point of sale, and driving number of transactions. But actually, when you think about the circular economy and the behaviours that we need to start embedding in a more mainstream way throughout society, it gets more interesting, because it's not just about that initial transaction that you're trying to drive. It's about thinking about that whole customer life cycle, and that's when your job evolves to some degree, and it becomes more about the experience throughout an interaction with a customer rather than just a transaction. And I think that's really exciting, not least also because a lot of marketeers have access to so much understanding about what people want and need. Like, they have access to all of this data and insight about way that humans behave, and they're super creative. So when you combine like creativity, storytelling, and actually hard facts, like, that's when you can work out like what are those interactions that are actually going to make a difference. And we've thought about this topic a lot, particularly in our partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So towards the end of last year, we actually launched a playbook which was all about how marketeers can accelerate the adoption of circular economy. And within that, we essentially explain 4 pathways, we call them action pathways, through which marketers can make a difference. And in essence, it is sort of a practical step-by-step guide that talks about what you can do in your everyday role. Think about the sort of bigger shifts that might need to occur, or how you might be able to influence them in your position, and also provide sort of a number of different case studies of inspiration. What are people doing that's interesting, unique? What can you learn from it? So I'd say that's a good place to start if you're at the beginning of your journey.
I love the way that you just kind of really neatly almost sort of brought this circularity thing around into kind of customer journey, customer experience, and that kind of end-to-end engagement. So rather than just, as you say correctly, in my view, a lot of marketers and a lot of people think marketing is about that kind of front end of the journey. Let's bring people to the front door, then the sales team can take over, they can sell it, and then hey, everybody's happy. This is going so much deeper, isn't it, into the customer relationship? Because if you take circularity as a concept and say, okay, well, we're going to maybe use it at the awareness stage of the customer journey. So actually help people to understand that, you're not just buying from us, you're actually entering into a deeper, longer relationship. Then there's something in that stage of the journey, isn't there? At the conversion point where I'm comparing brand A with brand B, if brand A are doing circularity, there's something really attractive there. So I'm probably going to trust brand A a lot better than I would brand B, who are just going to get me to buy something, because it's almost this promise of a greater future, really, both in the relationship, but also kind of, what's being given back to planet and society and community, etc. So that all sounds good. But then for me, the really interesting question then is it when it comes to the kind of the retention stage of the journey. So post initial sale, where you've actually now got this relationship, and you're going to have to try and play with this relationship over time, build loyalty, hopefully get some advocacy out of it. And so in that stage of the journey, I personally think then, from the way you're describing it, that's where the real fun will start, because this is something we can then use as you used the word storytelling, as a bit of a story tell to keep engagement up with existing customers. So it's kind of, we can tell the good kind of examples of maybe others who are doing certain things, or, the kind of the work that we're doing to try and improve the processes, or whatever it happens to be. Everybody's going to translate that differently. But I think the really interesting thing then comes from, this real kind of intimacy of the journey, because you can't do it without the customer. You can't do circularity without the customers buying, can you? Because you're going to want to, at certain points, get stuff back so that you can rework it, repurpose it, recycle it, whatever, and then serve them with additional value. Is that kind of like replacement products and replacement stuff? It feels like a really intimate sort of engagement here, so much deeper than would have otherwise been if it was just like a transaction.
No, I think you're right, and I think it's a challenging process to, I suppose, get off the ground initially, if it's totally new and you are sort of operating in a linear model. But I think there are so many benefits, and I think from a marketing perspective, as you say, like, you have so many more touch points, you have so many more opportunities to engage with your customer that can have a positive impact on the way that they perceive and engage with your brand. So it's not just thinking about the acquisition, it's thinking about how they use your product. Do they keep it in use for as long as possible? And then how do they then pass that on for second life? Is it about returning back to your facilities, your partner facilities, or do they never actually own that product? Is it just literally something that they access, they get the benefit that they're seeking, and you take on that responsibility in terms of the producer of maintaining that service to the standards of which you hold yourselves accountable. But yeah, I think it is different. And just to respond to one of your other comments earlier, we absolutely can't do this without people being inspired, people wanting to be a part of this journey. And although there is a large portion of the population of people who are really engage with sustainability in general. So at Kantar, we call that group of people sort of eco-actives, people who go out of their way to find sustainable solutions. When you think about mainstream population, they need a bit more help. People are super busy. The solutions that we provide need to be better than the linear solutions that already exist, and we need to think about the sort of fundamental category drivers that people look for. So whether you're buying a food product that's made with regenerative ingredients, it can't just be all about the ingredients if you're not delivering on taste, because that likely in the food category is going to be one of the biggest drivers. And yes, you can communicate also about the circularity or sustainability benefits, but I think one sort of challenge we've had in the past is propositions being very focused on the sustainability benefit rather than the category benefit. And I think if we want to think about the mainstream consumer and how we normalize this, we need to make it really appealing, really desirable, and play into the facts that we know already exist.
So it's kind of almost then taking the very best bits of traditional marketing practice in terms of product positioning, almost positioning this as a product, or this in itself as a product, or a kind of a way of doing business, a way of interacting. It feels that you can't just plug this in. It's like, we're a circular business. Yeah, good. Off we go. There's a kind of almost a lot of thought here. This is going to infiltrate your processes and your systems, and everybody's got to be trained and aware of it. There's a lot of kind of in-house work to be done, isn't there, first, before you can then kind of launch something like this, because it's complicated, really. If you think how it kind of goes across all of your organization, every touch point is almost like you couldn't do this in isolation, could you?
Yeah, and I think that was one of our key learnings really from the research that we did feeding into the marketing playbook in partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, was some of the more progressive organizations in the circularity space that we spoke to had a really dynamic relationship between the supply and demand side of the business. And I think that is really important to getting to the outcomes that you're looking for, and making sure that those functions are working in tandem. And there's also a nice example, I think it was from Decathlon. They have what they call, I think it's OKRs, their objectives, and they're essentially shared cross-functionally so that the outcomes that they're trying to deliver marry up all of their needs and wants across those various different departments. So whether it's like customer experience versus commercial and sales marketing teams, they have shared KPIs, which means that they have to work together to achieve them. And I think you need both those sort of hardwired processes in the background, but also those like human relationships between different teams to make such a transformation happen. Because, as you say, like it is complex if you're at the early stages of making something work, when linear models have been embedded for as long as we probably know.
I guess a lot of people are sort of thinking, thank goodness there's a playbook. Thank goodness there's some guidance here, because it's like, I understand what Emily's saying, and I probably possibly agree with some of the stuff Neil's saying, but what do I do next? It's kind of really complicated. So playbooks, guidelines, and as you said, some of those examples, clearly are going to be very, very powerful. Not necessarily that you'll emulate exactly what everyone else does, but just to give that sense of confidence you're not going it alone here. I think that's obviously hugely powerful, isn't it? I want to pick up on something that you said a little bit earlier, this whole thing about maybe a customer doesn't actually ever own the product, because that's an interesting angle in circularity, isn't it? And I've always kind of played with it in my own head and trying to explain it to people. I don't know whether I've ever really truly made sense with this one, but to me it feels a little bit like a subscription model, or a kind of like a leasing model, where I enter into a relationship with a brand. They get me, I get them. It feels like this is going to be a good place to go, and I think I'm going to get some good products and services. So I commit. So as a customer, I commit. I say, yeah, okay, I'm up for this. And so I part with something, probably money, and then they serve me with value. And that could be some products that I possibly don't own, but I'm going to get it as part of my, and I'll use the word subscription to this brand, because obviously they need to get value and I want to get some value back too in this interaction. But rather than it being like a transactional thing where I've literally bought a product and okay, it's mine now because I paid for it. I'm entering into and actually committing to the relationship. And to me, that feels really circular, because then we've got this kind of conversation, we've got this dialogue, we've got this kind of interaction as we build our relationship as customer and brand. They can serve me with whatever's appropriate that I would define as valuable. And I can say yes or no, and kind of we can interact on that basis. And so the brand or the marketers or whoever is going to take ownership of this have always got almost sort of control over what's going on, i.e. the circular bit that they can then use. But I'm always super happy. So why would I go anywhere else as the customer? Because I'm always getting value. Yes, I'm having to pay for this value, but of course, I should. And yet it becomes potentially very, very sustainable commercially and through this whole circularity thing. Have I kind of read that right? Because I mean, that's how I've been interpreting how this might play out if I don't actually buy a product, but I buy into a relationship. Can that be circular?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are some good examples, particularly I think in the mobility space, where that you're seeking the end outcome, right? You need to be able to travel from A to B, whether that's in a car or on a bike, etc. But actually, a lot of the time, a bike is sitting in your shed, or a car is on your drive or on the street, and actually, it's not in use a lot of the time. And so, what I think circularity can do, and thinking about circular business models, as you mentioned, is basically a subscription to the benefit or the value that you seek. And making that super easy for you in a way that works with your current lifestyle. So there's an amazing brand called Swapfiets that started in the Netherlands, which essentially rent out it's mainly bikes, but I think they also do scooters too. And essentially you pay a subscription fee, you get access to the bicycle, you can use it as much as you want, but they take away all of the worry around like maintenance or it getting stolen. So that's where you get the added value, which I think is a really strong propelling proposition for people that may have wanted their own bike to be able to customize it. But actually, if they're like, there's so much risk around it being about it being stolen or it breaking, and I don't want to worry about that anymore. Actually, a circular business model like they suggest gives them the benefit that they need, but also it's more convenient and you also don't need to worry as much. So yeah, I think subscription is a really exciting way in which customers can engage with the circular economy in a way that's really easy and fits into our lives already.
It's really exciting, isn't it, when you stop and think about this? I'm going to encourage everybody listening or watching this to kind of just really pause and reflect on this, cycling or scooters or cars or whatever that model, because it's one that I guess most of us can kind of get our head around. And it's really interesting when you think of this from the business's perspective. If you're doing a transaction and you sell a product that's taken you X amount of time and resources and widgets to create, and you sell that product once, it's gone. I'm now going to just do a little pause just to let the tumbleweed roll past here. There it is. But that's it, isn't it? And it's like, oh, well, I might send that customer an email now and again, but there's no relationship there really. The kind of the onus and the ownership of the product is now completely out of my hands as the business. It's kind of gone. So it's a kind of very tenuous. You say, oh, we've got these customers. We haven't really, because they're gone. They bought. They've kind of gone over the horizon. Whereas actually what we're talking about here is that product that's come off of your shop floor or out of your warehouse or whatever, you can sell that multiple times to multiple people. So just from a commercial perspective, that thing now hasn't just been sold and then lost to one person. It's actually gone maybe to half a dozen people who maybe live in the same area if it's a bike or a scooter. And And so you've just now quadrupled, I don't know what 5 times is, what the word is, but you know what I mean? You've scaled up the number of sales of that product. Not only have you done that, but as you said there, in terms of the maintenance of it, of the taking it back when it comes to end of life, and then you serve them with another one, but you can then use the parts or melt stuff down or whatever. This is just genius, really, isn't it? I mean, it's so simple. Why haven't we done this before?
Mhm. Well, that's a good question. I think it's finally, yeah, dawning on us that there is a lot of value to be had in resources, essentially, but also yeah, thinking about your ecosystem and where that value leakage is occurring, really, whether it is through as you say, like a bicycle and its spare parts, or otherwise. And yeah, I think now it's almost a no-brainer, as long as you can make the maths work when it comes to um, repair, for example, and making sure that works in a way that's profitable for the business as well, and sustainable from a commercial perspective. I think, yeah, for lots of categories, it's a no-brainer. I think it's slightly more challenging in other categories, particularly consumables, where there's a lot of different variables to consider. But I think in categories where you have products that are durable, it's definitely a no-brainer.
Does it only apply, in your experience, in kind of product businesses, so tangible physical product, or would this play across into service business? Because I guess in my head, apart from like a subscription thing, I'm struggling to see kind of how circularity plays in service businesses. I'm thinking like financial services, legal sector, the professional services, for example. I mean, is there an equivalent kind of model there?
I think it's, from a service perspective, you still need to think about the back end, right, and how that service is delivered. So I think it may not be as visible from a consumer perspective or B2B perspective. But if you're thinking about your operations and how you run your business, then circularity can still definitely come into play in terms of the technology that you use, how that's replaced over time, the suppliers that you work with. So I think in a B2B sort of service environment, it's thinking about your supply chain in particular, how you operate, and how that's delivered in a way that works in harmony, I suppose, with people and nature, and it isn't having a negative impact on either.
Yeah, so I think it is about its translation, isn't it, all the time? And I guess really, in lots of ways, that's where the playbook and the various kind of models that you and your partners have been, creating, it really come into play here, because it is about translating the theory into, okay, but what's real in my business? How can I actually interpret, the nuts and bolts here, but actually make it meaningful for my business? I mean, does this only really apply at a sort of a corporate kind of multinational, kind of big conglomerate kind of level, or can we do this literally in a micro business? Can this apply everywhere, do you think?
Yeah, I think it can definitely apply everywhere. I spoke to some amazing startups when we were designing the playbook and doing our initial research phase, who were either born circular or had transitioned over time, and they are, to some degree, have the opportunity to embrace new ways of thinking and working, whether it's like the KPIs that they use. I remember one conversation we had where I learned all about the sort of concept of circular lifetime value. So not just thinking about, it was the point I mentioned before around like not just thinking about transactions, but thinking about like the value of a customer, and sort of how that surmounts over time. And they're embracing these metrics as if they've always exist, but it's just that they look at business success slightly differently. So yeah, I would say totally, it's not something just for the incumbents of this world to think about how they transition from A to B, but I think in smaller operations, you've almost got that more space for experimentation and control over what it is that you want to deliver to people, and how you go about that, really.
Wonderful. So there really is genuinely hope for us all. You started the conversation with hope. I guess we're coming full circle, as we would in a
Yeah.
circularity conversation, to this whole thing that there is hope. And actually, it probably is. This is a call to arms for everybody, is to say, look, consumption is ugly, circularity is a thing of beauty, so let's try and sort of figure this out together and collaboratively. And I guess in your position, Emily, you would be encouraging people to make contact if they feel that they either want to get in touch with the playbook, or whether they actually would like some consulting help with this. I mean, you would be literally on call for that kind of an inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the playbook that I've referenced is available publicly. We want everyone to be able to use it. But any questions, or you're thinking about what this means for me and my business, like, my door's always open. So please feel free to get in touch. Happy to answer any questions. Also love just hearing stories about people's own experiences, how they're translating it in their own business environments, and the opportunities that they've seized or the challenges they face. So yeah, very happy for anyone to get in touch.
Wonderful. Emily, it's just been so good. I mean, it's so lovely to hear that there is, this real sort of groundswell of positivity in this area, because, I think a lot of us who have talked this thing for quite some time feel it's almost quite a lonely kind of crusade, whereas actually there's a lot of support, a lot of people talking about it, and it is just super positive commercially, as well as, the planet and everything else that's going on. Emily Hale from Kantar, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, everyone.